Okay, so this is a presentation that I was asked to give to a small group, and so I wanted to put it online, and it's about really try to give a big picture of the COVID-19 situation, and it's done from a UK perspective. So I'm going to start off with a bit of information about me, a bit of information about the background to COVID-19, and a bit of information about virus isolation and pandemic declaration, reporting of deaths, UK government statements and action and crimes, PCR testing for supposed virus detection, use of masks, and the larger picture of what's actually going on. And then I did allow some time for questions, but people can obviously email me questions. I'll just take a quick step back, because when I did this presentation I was picked up on the use of the word fascism, and because of the political definition of that. But essentially I was using this word, and as do many others, because of the definition which it's associated with. Perhaps, for example, it can mean restrictions on individual freedom, even though fascism has a specific meaning in a political context, and it could be, for example, characterized by extreme nationalism, which we're not having at the moment, with the COVID thing, but we are having more of a form of communism. So you could almost call it medical communism as well, perhaps. So I just wanted to mention that, because again it's a loose use of language perhaps, but the point is it's about restricting people's freedom. So that's why I use the word fascism. Maybe it is not a very good use, but there you are. Okay, so about myself, I grew up in Yorkshire. I went to Lancaster University between 1983 and 1986, and I did computer science and physics. So I'm not a medical person, I'm not a doctor. So again, if you're somebody, for example, that needs to get the confirmation of a meteorologist to confirm whether it's raining or not, or whether it's sunny, then you shouldn't really be watching this presentation, because you shouldn't really be. You'll need somebody who has a larger number of qualifications in medical sciences or medical issues than myself. But then, of course, you should not listen to people like Bill Gates or Tedros Adhanom, because they don't actually have medical qualifications either, even though they have substantial interests in what is going on at the moment. I'll probably get to Tedros Adhanom later on. So my background is in software engineering, and I worked in that discipline from 1986 professionally till about 2009. Haven't really done much since then, and professionally I've continued to run a blog about programming and stuff. So I'm used to doing analysis, fault finding and troubleshooting in a software development and debugging environment. So you've got to really pick through information and be quite patient on unpicking things, problem solving, working out new techniques to move a project forward or solve engineering problems. So that's the mentality that I'm coming from. But I've also worked in teaching and education. Again, I've no professional teaching qualifications. I did do a City and Guild 730 Part 1 back in the early 90s, and that seemed to serve me well, and I ended up doing full-time lecturing at an evening class at South Nottinghamshire College, and then I ended up doing full-time teaching at Mansfield College, which is now called, I think, Vision or something last time I looked. So I became intensely interested in alternative knowledge in 2003 when I got broadband internet, but specifically relating to what I'm going to discuss in this presentation was that I was very sceptical of the claims of the swine flu pandemic in 2009, and I wrote to the UK Department of Health about this, and I've got a couple of slides about that. And I there's a presentation you can find on my website, my other website, which I'll mention at the end, about that from I think 2010, I think that's from, but I was talking about that in 2009. This thing here, by the way, is some process control equipment that I worked on in Japan, so that's just what that is. So regarding the COVID-19 research, what I've done is developed a crowdsourced website where people have sent me a lot of information, and they've been doing this pretty much daily since March really, and I've been updating that website since the early days, March, April. I can't remember the exact date that I started it, but I was putting stuff on my other website, which I mentioned at the end, from March. Now, I also compiled a 24-page report entitled Challenging the COVID-19 Narrative, Reclaiming Our Future, and you can find copies of that on my website. So here it is. That's what it looks like on the cover page. There's PDFs, there's online versions, etc. So I did that in early March. Actually, that got translated into German by some very kind person as well, called Stephen. Then later on, I produced a 28-page report, which this presentation is centered around, called COVID-19 Evidence of Fraud, Medical Malpractice, Acts of Domestic Terrorism and Breaches of Human Rights. And I've sent that round to quite a lot of people. I've gained the support of about 1,700 people from that. And if you go onto this report on my website, I've got the links at the bottom of this slide. You, for example, can find that on this website here. So that's the first report. And then this is the second one, and you can find, for example, a list of signatories. I've updated this on the 25th of September, and that's there, so you can see all those there if you want to go and look who supported me. There's about 500 gave their permission to actually put their names on, and then there's another 1,200 that didn't really want their names published. So that's how what I've been doing on this since the whole thing kicked off. My executive summary, for those that just want to see my conclusions and not watch the rest of the presentation, are that the SARS-CoV-2 virus is no more infectious or dangerous than other similar viruses. And I will say, having said that, that there is, I think, very good evidence to question the whole basis of virology. If you look at things like what Béchamp was doing and Pasteur, and look into that whole story, and how, for example, the word virus originally meant poison, but then they changed that definition or started to use a different sort of meaning for the word virus in the 1930s. You know, look into all of that. I'm not going to go into that here, but it's worth looking into that. The pandemic projections about the number of deaths were wrong. Pandemic modelling software is or was flawed and is unreliable. Death figures for COVID-19 are exaggerated. Death causes have been falsely attributed to COVID-19. The COVID-19 SARS-CoV-2 test is not fit for purpose. The government and WHO advice is irrelevant, contradictory, and in any case not being consistently applied or adhered to by the authorities and leaders themselves. Some group, which includes Bill Gates and his foundation, that's the BMGF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, appeared to have foreknowledge that a pandemic would be declared in 2020. The same group appears to have some kind of business interest in a global vaccination program, which could be coupled with some kind of biometric immunity passport, which may be used to dictate an individual's freedom of travel and association. And that, I wrote this text a while ago, and that's now pretty much, come in really over the summer months. A lot of places already restricting entry at borders and things like that. And you've got to have this test. So that fits this, the test currently fits this immunity passport description, really. Plans for resetting and rebuilding things seem to be very closely linked to the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, i.e. the Green Agenda, which I'll mention near the end. So, going back to 2009 then, and a bit of deja vu, and that's the link to my presentation on this. Now, in 1976, they also had a swine flu pandemic, according to what happened in the US. But what Dr. Mercola points out on his website, that the last time the public had been warned about the swine flus in 1976, this is before 2009 of course, it resulted in a massive swine flu vaccine campaign. Within a few months, claims totaling $1.3 billion had been filed by victims who had suffered paralysis from the vaccine. The vaccine was also blamed for 25 deaths. It was stated by American officials that Mary Tyler Moore had taken the vaccine and she had not. So I've got a clip here from that time.
I don't need another flu shot. I had a flu shot last year. A swine flu epidemic may be coming.
Swine flu shot? Well, I don't know. I've been thinking about it.
It could make you very sick. Swine flu? Man, I'm too fast to let it catch me.
You'll want to be protected.
I'm the healthiest 55-year-old you ever seen. Hey, I play golf every weekend.
Get a shot of protection. The swine flu shot.
Joe brought it home from the office. He gave it to Betty and one of his kids, and to Betty's mother. But Betty's mother went back to California the next day. On her way to the airport, she gave it to a cab driver, a ticket agent, and one of the charming stewardesses. At school, Joe's kid gave it to some other kids, and Mrs. Merrill got it and gave it to her husband. In California, Betty's mother gave it to her best friend, Dottie. But Dottie had a heart condition and she died. But before she died, Dottie gave it to her girlfriend, the mailman, the paper boy, and the vet when she went to pick up her chihuahua.
If a swine flu epidemic comes, this is how it could spread. You'll want to be protected, especially if you're elderly or chronically ill. Get a shot of protection. The swine flu shot.
So there you are. It's very similar to what's going on now. So the other thing that happened in 2009, which really kind of kicked me off into writing to these people, was in the UK they sent this leaflet to all UK households, and in it said no one will have immunity to the virus. That was a lie. You always get some natural immunity to whatever it is. Not everyone falls victim to these viruses or whatever they are. Some people always express no symptoms. It's been the same with this alleged coronavirus. So I actually wrote to two bodies back then. One was a local body, and essentially, as with COVID-19, the symptoms of swine flu so far are indistinguishable from regular flu or from the common cold. It does not cause death any more often than regular flu causes death, really. As with the current scam, media reports deliberately hyped up the danger, deaths and cases attributed to swine flu, and it's been about 5 times worse than it was in 2009 with the coronavirus. Hype has been about 5 times worse, 10 times worse than it was, 100 times worse even than it was back in 2009. And back in 2009, the reports about people dying would often include the word underlying health problems, and it's been the same with the COVID scam. Now, if you looked back then at what was in the vaccines that were put out for swine flu, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about on the next slide, because we're getting a sort of similar thing happening now. Some people, for example, are allergic to egg proteins, so if you put those in a vaccine, they can cause an allergic or anaphylactic reaction in some people. So you should be aware of that before you take a vaccine. The vaccine had gelatin in it, known to cause allergic reactions and anaphylaxis. That is usually associated with sensitivity to egg or gelatin. That's sort of same sort of reactions to both of those. Polysorbate 80 can cause severe allergic reactions, including anaphylaxis. Formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. Triton X100, a strong detergent. Sucrose, which causes table sugar, sort of relatively harmless, but you'd normally take that in through the stomach rather than it being injected into muscle or whatever. Resin can cause allergic reactions. Gentamicin, that's an antibiotic. And thimerosal, which is of course a mercury compound, they claim that the mercury is in a way, it's in another molecule, so it's not toxic and da-di-da-di-da. But I would dispute that, and many other people do as well. So look into all of that, the mercury that's in some of the vaccines. So I wrote to some of the UK health bodies about the swine flu, and I wanted to ask them various questions, which I did. So on the 26th of June 2009, I wrote to Derbyshire Health Authority, also known as Derbyshire Primary Care Trust, with a list of 17 questions. You can find the emails. In fact, what I meant to say earlier is if you go to my reports, the 2 reports that I mentioned, you will then find links to all of this information, and you can find copies of the emails that I sent back then on my website in a PDF file. So I wrote to them the 17 questions. I haven't listed them all here, I've just got a couple from them. They responded to me on the 19th of August, so it took them a while. And then I also wrote to the Department of Health in the UK as it was then. They've changed the name now. And they replied on the 24th of August. So I asked the Derbyshire Primary Care Trust, I said, can you state clearly why swine flu is perceived as being so threatening when so far no symptoms other than those of normal flu seem to have been reported? They replied, the UK has been preparing for a possible flu pandemic for the last 3 to 4 years. This has been on the basis that historical patterns of infection suggested that a pandemic would emerge in this generation. These preparations were predicted on the potential threat posed by avian flu. So again, the avian flu never really materialised as a pandemic, so they didn't really answer my question. So they didn't really have any evidence that it was going to be so threatening, other than they thought avian flu might be, but it wasn't. So that was the sum total of that. Same question to the Department of Health, and I got a different answer. Swine flu poses a threat because it is a new type of virus that few, if any, people have full resistance to. In most cases, the virus has proved relatively mild, as you suggest, so they're agreeing with me, even though I'm not a medical person. However, around the world, thousands of people have died, and it is not yet clear how big a risk the virus is. For this reason, because all viruses can mutate to become more potent, scientists are advising a cautious approach. So they didn't have any referenced evidence. They were just saying, oh, well, it might be worse. So it's a bit like saying, well, actually, you know, everyone's got a car, a lot of people drive, and sometimes they kill people, and one day they might kill 2 people in a row, so we should just ban people driving, really. It's very similar to that. And that's exactly what they've done with the COVID. But they did this the same in 2009, and not many people have referred to this in the current scam. And in fact, this goes way back as well. You can read the book Inventing AIDS by Dr. Peter Duesberg, and they tried to do a similar thing with AIDS back then and get a test introduced and stuff, which they kind of did because that's still used. But going back to the Derbyshire Primary Care Trust, I asked them, are you concerned that there is inaccurate and alarmist information in the leaflet distributed to millions of homes? And it said no one is immune from swine flu. They said that general fitness and good health does not provide immunity to new infections, but may promote a faster recover period. Well, that's rubbish. Good health does promote a good immunity, and a good diet does as well. Influenza type H1N1 is a new strain of flu which people in younger age groups will not have experienced previously and will therefore not have immunity. But the leaflet said no one would have immunity, not young people. So they've contradicted what's said in the leaflet anyway. So there you are. Can't even get their facts straight on simple things. I asked the Department of Health, are drug companies, Baxter Healthcare Limited and GlaxoSmithKline, because they were the ones that were producing this vaccine for the swine flu in 2009, are they immune from prosecution by those people that experience any serious or debilitating side effects after having the vaccine, as happened in 1976? They replied, the government signed the advance purchase agreements for the vaccines in June 2007 and accepted liability for their safety as a contingency. All governments signing up to an advance purchase agreement were expected to provide an indemnity for the vaccine, and neither manufacturer would sign the contracts without it. Really? Well, that's quite an admission, isn't it? Because A, they said they got these vaccine deals signed 2 years before the alleged swine flu outbreak, and it's a bit like saying, well, we're going to buy these cars from, the Ford Motor Company for our tax officers driving around the country or whatever, doing tax audits or whatever it is, or whoever. But if they break down, it's going to be our fault. The Ford Motor Company says, well, those cars break down, you're going to have to fix them and pay for the repairs because, it won't be our fault if they break down. So that's the sort of thing you're dealing with. And Bill Gates said the same thing in his April the 12th interview on the BBC. So go and watch that. I haven't got it in this presentation, but other people have got it online. So they're doing the same scam again. Now, of course, it's ludicrous to go as far as suggesting that in some way the pharmaceutical companies held the governments to ransom over the issue of these indemnity clauses and whatnot. I'll leave you to think about that. Now, back in 2005 and back in 2009 as well, when I was researching into this, I came across this document, or maybe somebody sent it to me, and it's a WHO document, and it's called 2 checklists for influenza pandemic preparedness planning, and there's the reference, and I've got a link at the bottom. During a pandemic, it may be necessary to overrule existing legislation or individual human rights. Examples are the enforcement of quarantine, overruling individual freedom of movement. Does this remind you of anything? Use of privately owned buildings for hospitals, almost. Off-licence use of drugs, That's been talked about recently. Compulsory vaccination or implementation of emergency shifts in essential services. These decisions need a legal framework to ensure transparent assessment and justification of the measures that are being considered and to ensure coherence with international legislation, as in international health regulations. So there are several points there which are quite reminiscent of what's been happening in the last few months. And I asked the Department of Health, is Britain a signatory to this checklist, or is the EU, UK or other legislation in place which would mean that this checklist can be applied to UK citizens? And they replied, the WHO document to which you refer is simply intended as guidance to assist member states in planning in their flu pandemic planning. Isn't that interesting? And we've seen again that things have changed since 2009, I think, in those areas. Now, when I started to investigate the COVID scam, I actually went and reviewed the ONS, that's the Office of National Statistics, death figures for 2009, because they are on the website. They go back to 2006. Anybody can find these relatively easily. And I downloaded some spreadsheets with the overall deaths for months and years in, I think it was England, England and Wales, it says in the table there. So certainly as regard England and Wales, there was very big panic over this supposed swine flu pandemic, but the figures clearly show that, in fact, by their own figures, less people died in 2009 overall than died in 2008 and in 2010. And in 2008, many more people died. 17,000 people more died in 2008. Does that look like the pattern of a pandemic? Well, I'll leave you to make up your own minds about that and what the figures are actually showing now. And, people have been talking about the COVID scam as we sit now in November 2010, and the death figures of what that looks like. Very little difference to previous 5-year averages and things like that. Going back to the vaccine again, in the British Medical Journal, it only took them 9 years, of course, September 2018, titled Pandemics Vaccine. Why was the public not told of early warning signs? The first paragraph in that paper reads, 8 years after the pandemic influenza outbreak, a lawsuit alleging that GlaxoSmithKline's Pandemics vaccine caused narcolepsy has unearthed internal reports suggesting problems with the vaccine's safety. Peter Doshi asks what this means for the future of transparency during public health emergencies. So there you are. It's the same as what's been happening now. We've had reports from people dying in Korea after a vaccination, people dying in Singapore. One person has fallen very sick, allegedly, in the Oxford trials and so forth. It's the same script again. It's the same script. So to summarise what I felt about the swine flu and what the conclusions I drew from the evidence that was there and is there now, no compelling evidence was presented that the swine flu pandemic was a real threat. The UK government made vaccine deals with pharmaceutical companies in 2007. How did they know what was going to be needed? When this swine flu was apparently unknown in early 2009. The UK government accepted liability for those companies' vaccines. Vaccine was not properly tested and caused injury to some people. Vaccine contains a number of toxic substances. So again, make of that what you will. So we move on. So in the year of normal vision, many seem to have become blind, and this of course is a reference to 2020 vision, in case you didn't realise that. So WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom declared the COVID-19 pandemic on the 11th of March 2020, yet Adhanom, as I said earlier, does not have a medical degree. You can go and look at that. He actually did his degree in Community Health Studies at Nottingham University, funnily enough, which is not too far from where I live. He is strongly connected to cases of human rights abuses in his home country of Ethiopia. From an article on the Burning Platform, we can find that the head of the WHO was the third most powerful person in the TPLF, a communist revolutionary party in Ethiopia that was listed as a terrorist organisation in the 90s and as a political arm of the minority ethnic group of 6% of that population. reportedly conducted systematic discrimination and human rights abuses against the majority ethnic group. And that's the kind of activities that he was associated with. Not only that, but Dr. Tedros Adhanom appointed Robert Mugabe, another leader charged with many human rights abuses, look that up if you are not familiar with him, as a WHO Goodwill Ambassador in 2017. So again, what does that tell you? And interesting symbolism in this TPLF logo here, isn't there? For those that are interested in that. And then, of course, I've got to mention the pandemic tabletop exercise was hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in New York, and this related to coronavirus, and that's on the 18th of October 2019. And this, of course, was the event 201. I'll just play a clip from that, just briefly.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died.
So there you are. That should give you enough of a flavour of that. And there's various information on the website. Now, about 6 weeks after this event 201, in early December 2019, the first COVID-19 case was allegedly diagnosed in the polluted city of Wuhan, China, which is very polluted, and you can go and find the pictures of that. They have tried to say, as you might expect, that this is just a coincidence. You can go and look. I think they updated their website with some statement. Also, what I think you can go and do is you can look at the role of the Global Preparedness and Management Board, and there's a 2019 document. Again, I haven't got the link here, but it's easy to find, and Amazing Polly has done videos on that, so have a look at that. Generally indicates foreknowledge of something being planned. And just to throw in here, I discovered this in my research somewhere. Again, I'm not sure if somebody sent me this, but it is from the European Commission website. Conspiracy theories. Is this one? Check before sharing. Be warned. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen a rise in harmful and misleading conspiracy theories. It may be difficult to recognise them or know how best to deal with them. But do what it says. Check the facts. Check the sources. Boom. Just do what they say. But it's interesting that they've got this whole flowchart there, and the links at the bottom here. I'm sure you can find this relatively easily. I'll try and put all these links in the description, the ones that are not already in the report. And yeah, go and check it out. Do as they say. But somebody's worried, I think. Okay, so moving on to March, the UK opted for the fear agenda against the advice of the scientific panel that they were employing at the time. So the UK government scare model, that of course was introduced by Neil Ferguson, and he estimated from his computer model that there would be 500,000 deaths, and I think that was revised to 20,000 fairly quickly. And again, people have explored this in other videos. You can go and find those. This software was just a modelling software. It wasn't really based on clinical data as such, not particularly. Very, very inaccurate. Code wasn't very well debugged, and this has been reviewed by other coders, and you can find articles on things like Lockdown Skeptics about that. But the thing about Ferguson, of course, people are probably familiar with this, was that he flouted the lockdown rules so that he could go and spend time with his mistress or his girlfriend. So that got into the papers. So why did he do that? Well, it's not so much really that he was being dishonest about his mistress or whatever, but clearly the virus was not a threat. Else, if he was really worried from his own predictions, he wouldn't have done that. So he wasn't worried. He knew that he was basically putting out a fraudulent narrative. He knew that. That's the point I wanted to make. Not that he was a naughty boy for going to see his girlfriend or his mistress or whatever you want to call her. So Ferguson track record is obviously, as you can easily find out, it's terrible. He's been involved in the 2001 outbreak of foot and mouth disease in terms of the modelling of that. And there'd be 150,000 people who said he could die, 200 died. Ferguson also predicted that 50,000 people would likely die from exposure to BSE, mad cow disease, in beef, but only 177 were attributed to that. And again, check out that. If you read David Parker and Dawn Lester's book, What Really Makes You Ill, they argue that that BSE thing was caused by the introduction of a new chemical, an agrochemical, to bathe cattle in to get rid of ticks or whatever it was, or pests, and it was that chemical that got into the spines of the cattle and then passed into the food chain, and it was that chemical that got into people's bloodstream. It wasn't a virus, it wasn't a prion as such, it was a chemical, and they had to put out the BSE story so that the company that produced that chemical would not get prosecuted. In 2005, Ferguson predicted that up to 150 million people could be killed from bird flu, and in the end only 282 people died worldwide from the disease between 2003 and 2009. That's a period of 6 years. So this is nothing, and again, they say they died from this disease, but how did they test for it? What tests did they use? And we're going to come on to the testing later. And in 2009, a government estimate based on Ferguson's advice said a reasonable worst-case scenario was that swine flu would lead to 65,000 British deaths. In the end, it killed 457 people. So, Ferguson admitted in March 2020 that his Imperial College model of the COVID-19 disease was based on undocumented 13-year-old code, and it was intended to be used for a feared influenza pandemic rather than coronavirus. So they're actually different viruses, different diseases anyway. Ferguson declined to release his original code so that other scientists could check his results. He only released a heavily revised set of code after a 6-week delay. So there you are. There is no basis for this pandemic in terms of modelling. The model was rubbish, basically. It was meaningless. It was meaningless, as is much of the evidence on which they've tried to base this pandemic. And here we are. People have probably heard this declaration. COVID-19 is not an HCID, and this was posted on, perhaps I'm doing things in the wrong order, I'll go to this slide and then back to the previous one. You may have seen this, the status of COVID-19. As of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high-consequence infectious disease in the UK. The Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens is also of the opinion that COVID-19 should no longer be classified as an HCID, and that actually came from a group of people who was the chairman of this the chairman of this group, the ACDP, was Professor Tom Evans, and he sent a letter to Public Health England saying, "I am writing as chair of the Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens. The committee discussed today the classification of COVID-19 as a high-consequence infectious disease. The unanimous view of the committee was that this infection should not be classified as HCID, I should say." So there you are. The government was told, Public Health England was told, this was not a high-consequence infectious disease. They were told that on the 13th of March. So there you are, and that's what they put out on the 19th of March, 6 days later. But then, what happened after that? Well, on the 22nd of March, this Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, they published this document called Options for Increasing Adherence to Social Distancing Measures. And again, look into social distancing measures, look into what science it's based on. Social distancing is not based on clinical science, it's based on modelling. It's based on mathematical modelling, the same as the pandemic. So, go and check it out, go and look for the papers. So, SAGE released this document on the 22nd of March, all the twos there, look at that if you miss out the zeros. At the bottom of page 1 we read perceived threat. A substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. It could be that they are reassured by the low death rate in their demographic group, although levels of concern may be rising. Having a good understanding of the risk may have been found having a good understanding of the risk has been found to be positively associated with adoption of COVID-19 social distancing measures in Hong Kong. The perceived level of personal threat needs to be increased among those who are complacent, using hard-hitting emotional messaging. To be effective, this must also empower people by making clear the actions they can take to reduce the threat. Isn't that interesting? Not much about protecting health in that bit, is there? Because later in the page, in the table on page 6, we see use media to increase sense of personal threat, consider enacting legislation to compel required behaviours, consider use of social disapproval for failure to comply, and we'll see an example of that later on as well. It's staggering to observe that this document implies that there is a low death rate in a given demographic group, yet considers the need to use media to increase a sense of personal threat. It is not about public health, it never has been. It's about behavioural modification at this point. So, as shown earlier, Public Health England was told by the HCID on the 13th of March that COVID-19 was not a high-consequence infectious disease. Yet, 10 days later, Matthew Hancock, various names for him now, of course, who's the Health Secretary in the UK, he implied the opposite. He said the opposite of what he was told by the Scientific Committee. Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Matt Hancock, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Coronavirus is the most serious public health emergency that has faced the world in a century. We are all targets, but the disease reserves its full cruelty for the weakest and most vulnerable. To defeat it, we are proposing extraordinary measures of a kind never seen before in peacetime. Our goal is to protect life and to protect every part of the NHS. This bill, jointly agreed with all 4 governments, gives us the power to fight the virus with everything that we have. So there you are. He lied. Openly lied. A few minutes later he said, I can confirm the bill is to deal with the current coronavirus emergency, and that is an important point. But I would also say that although the world has changed in the past 3 weeks, in ways that many could not have imagined, every measure that has been taken by the government has been part of the action plan that we published 3 weeks ago. Of course, the bill has been drafted over a long period because it started on the basis of the pandemic flu plan that was standard before coronavirus existed and has been worked on over the past 3 months at an incredible pace by a brilliant team of officials right across government. But surely this was never expected to be a pandemic, was it? How is this possible? The bill is consistent with the action plan, so while some people might have been surprised by each of the measures we have taken, they have all been part of the plan that we set out right at the start. I can confirm that it is only for coronavirus. Now, this was stated by Hancock on the 23rd of March, and it implies work on the bill was started around the 23rd of December 2019. Yet the WHO declared a pandemic on the 11th of March 2020, only 12 days before this speech. So this 23rd of December, I think, was very close to this first case that was reported in China. So did Mr. Hancock misspeak, and did he mean 3 weeks and not 3 months? Something very fishy going on here. So again, what am I saying? I'm saying plainly that this indicates foreknowledge. This was all planned. And, again, as Lord Sumption recently pointed out, and I recommend that you watch this video, Government by Decree, which he gave to, I think, the Cambridge Law Society online. It was a Zoom lecture he gave. He actually, went through this bill with in some detail. He discusses some of the elements of it in this video. And he points out, for example, that this was 348 pages long, had 102 sections, 29 schedules, and was pushed through all its stages in Parliament and the House of Lords in a single day, just as the lockdown was announced. That's government by decree. No serious scrutiny of this bill was possible in that period of time, in just a couple of hours. So the Health Secretary, Mr Hancock, made a statement in the House of Commons the next day in which he said, "These measures are not advice, they are rules." All of this was bluff. Even on the widest view of the legislation, the government had no power to give such orders without making statutory regulations. No such regulations existed until 1 p.m. on the 26th of March, 3 days after the announcement. The Prime Minister had no power to give instructions to the British people, and certainly no power to do so by a mere oral announcement at a Downing Street press conference. The police had no power to enforce them. Mr Hancock's statement in the House of Commons was not correct. Until 26th of March, the government statements were not rules but advice, which every citizen was at liberty to ignore. So the government lied. And as Lord Sumption says, it might seem trivial to some, but they lied. They broke the law. We don't do that this way. These regulations, or the way that Parliament works, is meant to stop things like this happening. It's meant to stop bad laws from being implemented. But in this case it hasn't, and it's only got worse since then. And we'll see why. So, what was this all about? It was about protecting people. It was about saving lives, protect the NHS and all that, omni trium perfectum of these three, face, space, and whatever it is, and, protect lives, save the NHS, all that nonsense, all that programming. I've not even chosen to remember it because I know that they're trying to make you remember it. The way that deaths were classified and counted was changed. You can find in a spreadsheet on the Office of National Statistics website. I've added the emphasis here. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, our regular weekly deaths release now provides a separate breakdown of the numbers of deaths involving COVID-19. That is, where COVID-19 or suspected COVID-19 was mentioned anywhere on the death certificate, including in combination with other health conditions. So this is an admission that they are fudging, they are exaggerating the figures. That's the only way that this can be interpreted. It's an exaggeration. They want to get the numbers up because that is what they need to claim that there is a pandemic. That is one of the main things that the story stands on. And the same thing happened in the USA based on CDC recommendations and guidelines, and you can find that separately. So then we have this declaration on the 22nd of April, again, just a month after the SAGE document was published, all the twos again.
And we've been involved with the Cabinet Office Rapid Response Unit, with our 77 Brigade helping to quash rumours from misinformation, but also to counter disinformation. Between 3,000 and 4,000 of our people have been involved, with around 20,000 available the whole time at high readiness.
So what was that he said? We've been involved with the Cabinet Office Rapid Response Unit with our 77th Brigade, helping to quash rumours from misinformation, but also to counter disinformation. Between 3,000 and 4,000 of our people have been involved, with around 20,000 available the whole time at high readiness. But who decided what was misinformation and disinformation? That's the point that he skipped over. Why was he wearing camouflage in this meeting? Who is this guy? Well, it's Nick Carter, isn't it? I know that. But what does he think he's doing? Was this a declaration of information war on the British public? Sounded like that to me. So, this probably came from SAGE recommendations. I can't prove this yet. I've asked how much was spent on these advertising campaigns. One was run on the 17th of April, the one here. This was one on the 17th of April. Stay at home on all the, I think it was all of them anyway. I haven't gone through and rigorously checked all of them, but this is a page I found about this, the link of which is in my report. 17th of April, this one, and this one was the 14th of May down on the right. I think this is domestic terrorism that's being done on the British public. That's what it is. And so Nick Carter is guilty of it, Matt Hancock is, Boris Johnson is, the SAGE group is guilty of crimes of domestic terrorism on the British people. I don't think you can define it any other way because of what they've done. They've lied, they've exaggerated figures, they've put out media campaigns, not only this, but of course all the TV adverts, the radio adverts. I even had adverts coming into a music stream, which I didn't think, it was possible to have government adverts in that. There's certainly no news bulletins on this stream that I listened to, and they even had coronavirus adverts in that. I couldn't believe it. So they must have proved that this virus exists, because surely the pandemic is so bad. There must be a real virus. They must have some pretty good data about it. Because we're all going to die from this, aren't we? Well, actually, this seems not to be the case, because, for example, on the 24th of July, and there's several people that have done this now, Scotland, Ireland, England, Christine Massey, as you see here, she did it in Canada. We've written to the various health bodies. I wrote to Public Health England, some people's written to Public Health Scotland, some to Ireland, and they've basically used this FOI or one very similar, asking for evidence of the isolation from, essentially a sample of tissue or a sample of material from a corpse that somebody has died of this, to show that they've got the whole virus, isolated. They've got a particle of the virus isolated with its complete genetic sequence, not with bits missing or assembled from a jigsaw or whatever. And they actually responded that they don't have evidence of isolation, and they sent a link to a swab test. Now, again, this link is in my report that I've already mentioned, and you can find it at various places on the internet now, and other people have got the same result. They have never isolated this virus according to what are known as Koch's postulates. They've never isolated this virus. End of. And again, if you look in the CDC, which is the Centre for Disease Control, there's a document which you see here is called CDC 2019 Novel Coronavirus Real-Time PCR Diagnostic Panel, and this is from July 2020. I think this was published, and you can read on page 39 that the analytical sensitivity of the RT-PCR assays contained in the CDC 2019 Novel Coronavirus Real-Time PCR Diagnostic Panel were determined in limit of detection studies. Since no quantified virus isolates of the 2019 nCoV are currently available, assays designed for the detection of the 2019 nCoV RNA were tested with characterized stocks of in vitro transcribed full-length RNA, known as titer RNA copies, spiked into a diluent consisting of a suspension of human A549 cells and viral transport medium to mimic clinical specimen. So they were mimicking a specimen because they didn't have a real one. What does that tell you? They've never isolated the virus. But of course, we know that this virus is deadly because so many people have died, haven't they? I mean, Prince Charles died, Boris Johnson died, Mikel Arteta, he died, actor Tom Hanks has died of it, and of course Donald Trump's died of it. Oh, no, wait a minute, these people all got better, didn't they? And we'll get to this statement here from Chris Whitty again on the 11th of May, so another 11 day. We'll get to this statement. You can read it now if you want, but we'll get to it. So these is a suitable replacement for the brainwashing memes. So, moving on, we'll now look at PCR testing. There's a 20-minute video I've edited together here, so I'm going to play this. It's got Dr. Andrew Kaufman in it, a psychiatrist who has varied expertise, including molecular biology. Dr. Kerry Mullis, who invented the PCR test, and I stole a clip from Spyro, or I forget his second name, Spyro's video. He runs the Activist Post website. I've got a clip of his video. And then we're also going to hear from a chap called Luke Pompey, who posted the results of his COVID test in the UK on Facebook.
I looked at a different protocol than the one published here. I looked at one from Germany, and this one is from the Pasteur Institute in France. But it really confirmed my suspicion, and I was glad to see it, that basically one of the primer sequences in the PCR test, according to the Pasteur Institute protocol, is an exact match for a sequence in our own human DNA on chromosome 8. So I thought it might be helpful to take this, and because it's a big thing, it means a lot, but I want you know, it's difficult to kind of understand what are the real implications of a finding like this. So I thought it would be really helpful if we could just understand PCR a little bit better first and just the basics of how it works. So I'm going to play two different parts here. In the first part, they're talking about where they get the sample from. So listen to this.
The swab of a person with COVID-19 will contain a mixture of human cells, virus particles, and other microbes.
So did you hear that? It will contain a mixture of human cells, virus particles, and other microbes, which could mean bacteria or fungi or other microbes. Okay, so it's not a clean sample. And if we were testing for human DNA or RNA, we could find it because there are human cells in there and also fragments of human cells, such as apoptotic bodies or exosomes, or sometimes there's even free human DNA circulating in some of our fluids. So this is not a pure sample, and it certainly contains human genetic material from the beginning. So if we test for it, we could find it. Now this is another segment of here, and this shows sort of the mechanics of how the test works so you can get an idea.
There is not enough viral RNA to detect directly in the patient's sample, so a process called reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, RT-PCR, amplifies many copies of a segment of the N gene.
So what they're saying is that there's a tiny, tiny amount of the RNA that we're looking for in this sample that's really messy and contains a lot of stuff. So in order to be able to detect it at such tiny, tiny amounts, they have to amplify it or make multiple copies. And that's really what the PCR test does.
Short, single-stranded pieces of DNA called primers recognize unique RNA sequences within the viral genome that bracket the target region of the N gene. After the first primer binds, an enzyme called reverse transcriptase extends, synthesizes, a single-stranded DNA copy of the viral RNA.
Okay, so I want to stop here because this really shows the important part that we need to pay attention to. That you see in the bottom right hand, there's this short primer, right? So that's the only thing that we have identified in advance, like we created the primer. We could make a primer for any sequence, for any organism. And then when we put that in this reaction, basically we're looking for a piece of genetic material from some organism that matches it, is the complement, okay? Because when these two strands go together, they have a complementarity. It's like a plus and a minus that attract each other. And it's G's and C's and A's and T's, okay? So this is gonna look for a specific sequence in the sample that we're trying to find. And what the long strand that you saw in this video is, that's the sequence that could be from another organism that we're identifying. Now, since the primer, at least one of the primers that we have been talking about is an exact match for a sequence in chromosome 8, then it could identify a piece of a transcript from chromosome 8 rather than some genetic material from another organism. In other words, it can detect our own DNA. So I'll just want to share one more thing here to verify to everyone because it's really important to make sure that this information is correct. And so this is right here, the sequence of interest, okay? This 18-letter code, and it says it's from the RDRP gene in the virus, okay? So this I'm scrolling through right now is from GenBank, which is part of the National Institutes of Health, where they store all of the sequences from the Human Genome Project and also from other animal genomes. And so you can see Homo sapiens is human, chromosome 8, and then all this gobbledygook here is just basically how they took all the DNA and split it up for sequencing, and this is the primary assembly when they did it this way. But if you look to the bottom of this, and it gives some references, here's the actual sequence, and that matches exactly this sequence here, which is from the Pasteur Institute. Sorry, it's listed on the top in the file name. but this is the Pasteur Institute protocol from the World Health Organization. So you could see those sequences match up perfectly, because there's more than one primer that they can use. So this whole testing thing is very, very heterogeneous around the world. So in other words, there are different protocols in virtually every country. And a lot of them are recommended through the World Health Organization, but there are some from other bodies too. And they can use different primers. So, and even when they do just one sample, they're not going to use just one primer for a test and say if that one's positive, it's positive. So it's not exactly that clear cut. But what we're talking about here is at least one of the primers that they're using in one of the tests test for our own sequence. Okay, so this could come up positive in any human, regardless of the presence of any virus or anything else. So it adds another level of confusion and obfuscation to how do you interpret the results of a test like this. Now, I still think the most salient point is that we don't know where these sequences came from, because there was never a purified particle of a virus where they had a bunch of them together in one sample, and they could characterize those and pull the RNA material right out of those particles. They never did it that way. They only looked at it in this dirty sample, which was a mixture of many, many microorganisms and human cells. And they pulled these sequences out of there because they thought the sequences belonged to the family of coronaviruses. But that was based on only about 80% sequence identity between those samples. And, you know, when I looked and did that research previously with the other probes for a different protocol, for the Germany protocol, I found that many of those primers in that sequence had 80 to 85% sequence identity with stretches in the human genome as well. I just didn't find a complete match. I did find 18 in a row that matched, but those primers were 24 bases long. So there's a lot of overlap in this. And then if you also look at the nature of the PCR test itself, is that the enzymes that they use to copy the RNA make mistakes. And so they could give you a lot of false positives. And this is one of the problems that's always been known about this test. And the more you amplify it, because you do this test in cycles, right? And each cycle you double the copies of that piece of RNA that you're looking for. And the more times you double it, the more false signals that you get, because you're also amplifying like the noise signal, which could be other sequences that are partially matched, and they're not detectable until you amplify them so many times. And then it's like everything that is an artifact in there is also detectable, and that gives you a false positive. And that's one of the main reasons why Kary Mullis did not recommend using this as a diagnostic test, because of all those false positives. But, you know, in my opinion, since we don't know what the origin of this sequences that they're testing is, other than now we know one of them may come from our own sequences, like the human sequence, then there's really no way to calculate any accuracy. So I would say, you know, there's 100% error rate with this test.
Those tests are all based on things that are invisible, and the results are inferred in a sense. PCR is separate from that. It's just a process that's used to make a whole lot of something out of something. That's what it is. But it's not, it doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with really was going to hurt you or anything like that. That's what it's not.
Mullis was indeed a thorn in the side of the establishment during the time of the HIV/AIDS debate. He was very outspoken towards people like Dr. Fauci. Here's a quote from Mullis on Fauci from a lengthy but fantastic article called "Was the COVID-19 test meant to detect the virus?" Quote, "What ABC needs to do is talk to Fauci and Gallo and show they're assholes, which I could do in 10 minutes, end quote. Now, personally, without knowing Mullis, I have to admit that I like him, and I have little doubt in my mind, from my own point of view, that if he were alive today, the powers that be would not be able to use PCR in the perpetuate this manufactured crisis in the way that they are right now today. He was a thorn in their side then, and I'm sure he would have been an even bigger thorn in their side now. Now, this raises suspicions with me regarding the timing of his death just weeks before the outbreak. No disrespect to the family, and I have no proof at this point to go off of that. But again, the timing does raise some questions, I think, that should be looked into. Now, I'm going to play some more clips here. Some of these clips were sent to me. Some of them were put together by other people doing some great work out there, showing how the manipulation is taking place and several examples of doctors calling out the lies.
Good afternoon.
And we're starting off with the overall rates in terms of confirmed cases. As you can see on this graph, the numbers are now going up and going up really much more rapidly.
The test that we have for the virus does not tell us whether we have an active virus in a person. It's being called by the media a case.
And the UK has recorded almost 3,000 new cases of coronavirus.
The rise in the number of cases that we've seen today is concerning.
A case is when someone gets sick from a disease. That's completely different from a positive test.
It's not a case at all. It's just that we can detect that at some time in the past, perhaps, there has been viral infection, but it's probably been removed now.
Even if there is some asymptomatic transmission, in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses of any type, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks.
You must not meet socially in groups of more than 6, and if you do, you will be breaking the law.
It has what's been calculated as an infection fatality rate. That is, if you catch the infection, probability of you dying is 0.3%. So that means that 99.7% of people survive. 80% of people who catch this virus will be completely asymptomatic. Those people who do catch the virus, many of them, the effect will be like a bad flu. Those people who are actually hospitalized, then we do have very good treatments for these.
And anyone breaking the rules risks being dispersed, fined, and possibly arrested. As your Prime Minister, I must do what is necessary to stop the spread of the virus and to save lives.
The government reaction is causing more deaths now and will cause far more deaths in the future than the virus itself.
I was sent this document, and I'll go to the front, and you can see it's instructions for use for the Realstar SARS-CoV-2 RT-PCR kit 1.0, and then this is from 03. I'm assuming that's March 2020, which is about the right time frame. So they scroll down this document, and oh, look at that. It says for research use only. Let's scroll down a bit. So the Realstar SARS-CoV-2 RT-PCR kit 1.0 is a reagent system based on real-time PCR technology for qualitative detection and differentiation of lineage, beta coronavirus and severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. SARS-CoV-2 specific RNA. And it says again, for research use, not for use in diagnostic procedures. And we can see this word qualitative, which means that what it will do is detect this, what it claims to detect. Allegedly it will detect this, but it won't tell you how much there is. It will only tell you if there is a sample there or not, which a single sample can be amplified. It doesn't give you any actual diagnosis. It doesn't tell you how infectious you are or anything like that. It doesn't tell you, it just tells you whether this RNA sequence or one of several is present in the sample. That's all it does. And as Carrie Mullis says, it doesn't tell you if you've got sick from this. It doesn't tell you if you will be sick from this. It doesn't tell you that at all. Now, I have to wonder because a couple of months ago, I actually sent a Freedom of Information request to Public Health England asking for the names of companies that have produced the SARS-CoV-2 testing kits in England or the UK, and copies of the instructions and or guidelines included with one of more of these, preferably all of these testing kits that I use in the UK, and any labelling or recommendations that accompany the kits. Copies of pages which show what or how the results of these tests are interpreted. I made a couple of typos on here, unfortunately. But so anyway, I sent this to Public Health England. They said, no, we can't tell you. So please write to the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, which is what I sent this to. they wrote back to me and basically said prohibitions on disclosure. They quoted that, and the reason for that prohibition was information provided to the MHRA in the course of its functions under the Medical Devices Directives is required to be treated as confidential according to confidentiality provisions in Article 19 of Directive 98/79/EC on in vitro, that means in a test tube or in glass, diagnostic medical devices. Disclosure of the information you have requested would breach that obligation, and that's despite the fact that we've got this document from one such testing kit freely available. So what does that tell you?
Hi guys, so my name's Luke. I've recently seen a few videos online of people and stories as well. I've heard a few stories, like I'm sure we all have, of people getting false results back about coronavirus or COVID-19 tests. So I actually ordered 2 tests yesterday online. They came today in the post, but I'm not actually gonna swab myself. I'm just gonna physically take the little swab test out of the packet, snap it in half, put it in the tube without swabbing anything, and then follow the protocol explained in the step-by-step COVID test guide, and return it back to where it tells me to send it to, and just for experimental reasons see what result I get back. So yeah, stay tuned. Remove the swab from the pack, like you've literally seen that come out of the pack. Take that swab in, put it in the liquid, snap that off. So excuse me, try to do this with one hand. Put the cap back on. Put it in the seal bag. And then I will continue. It's hard to do this with one hand on my phone. So yeah, I'll put that in that bag and then post it off in the box. So that's that posted. Test, as you seen earlier on in the videos, on the 14th of October, which I think was last Thursday off the top of my head. Today I've had my results back, so I actually got my results this morning on my way to Burnley. Make of it what you will. Obviously my test has now contributed to the COVID test chart results going up, whatever. I've been informed to stay at home for 10 days from my symptoms starting. Well, I haven't had any symptoms. I don't have COVID. I didn't take the test properly. Yeah, so as you can see, this is the email I had this morning from the NHS. Official email with my name, date of birth, test date, saying that I'm positive and that I now need to isolate for 10 days from the start of symptoms. I've had a text message as well. And since that, I've had another email this morning from NHS and 3 text messages just making sure that I'm staying at home. I can imagine they're going to ring me for various points over the next 10 days to make sure that I'm home and isolating. What the bollocks.
So the creator of this PCR test, which has been used across the world, was Carey B. Mullis, as you can see here. Now, he was a Nobel Prize laureate inventor of the test, and when asked about the misuse of the test in that video clip you saw there, what he actually said was, the measurement is not exact. It doesn't tell you that you are sick or that the thing you ended up with is going to hurt you or anything like that. So they're using it in a way which is not appropriate, and it should be stopped immediately. I cannot overstate or overemphasize this fact. There is absolutely no justification for this test to be used in the way that it is being used, and it is being used to limit people's freedoms. That's what it's being used for. It's not to help them with any health issues or protect other people from getting sick. It doesn't work for that. It's no good for that. This is what the inventor said. How many times does this need to be told to people who don't want to hear it? Well, you can say it until you're blue in the mouth, and apparently it's not going to make any difference, is it? So if anybody is putting any stock in this test at all, you need to think very carefully about what you're doing, what you're saying, and how you are acting and how you are reacting. Because the case counts will never go down. Now that they've got this procedure in place, the case counts will always rise. Because as far as I know, or at least it's not being talked about, there is no way of actually equating cases to illness or cases to recovery. And in fact, as you saw in the video clip, a positive test is not a case. It's not a case. It's a positive test. That's what it is. So they've even changed the use of the language. And people do this now. I just did it then without even noticing. And that is the way that this works. So this is the likely goal of the fraud, a persistent excuse for all kinds of ongoing draconian measures. People have allowed medical fascism, and I've used that word again, or medical authoritarianism, if you want to call it that, to be thrust upon them and believe they are under a constant threat. This amounts to fraud on a massive scale. That's the only way I can describe it. And this was another Facebook meme I picked up. This is the leader from Victoria, Australia, whose name I forget at this point, and hopefully he will be a forgettable person in history for doing what he's done. So what's the next step then? Well, you've got to get the cases up, quote unquote, so you've got to get more tests done. How do you get more tests done? Well, how about bribing people? As a thank you, anyone in your household who takes part will receive a voucher for each visit. £50 for the first visit, £25 for each further visit. And I received a copy of this letter from a friend in Rochdale in Lancashire, in that area anyway. And he'd torn up his letter, but you can find this on the Wikispooks website. So go and have a look for this there, or maybe you've even seen this letter. And as you can see, it is financed by the Office for National Statistics and Oxford University. So go and work that one out. Now we get on to the topic of masks, which don't work in the way that you've been told or that's been suggested that it works. I mean, why would you want to report someone for not wearing a mask when it doesn't work? This was in the city of Edmonton. You can see they had a form on their website for snitching. What does this remind you of? What does this remind you of? How about medical fascism, medical communism, medical authoritarianism? So these are the quotes which you're now going to hear in a video clip. I'll leave that slide up for a few more seconds if you want to read them.
When the evidence around the use of masks by the general public, especially outdoors, is extremely weak.
The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak, quite difficult to know exactly, and there's no real trials on it.
In terms of wearing a mask, our advice is clear that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection really reduces the risk, almost not at all.
The recommendation from SAGE is completely clear, which is that there is weak evidence of a small effect in which a face mask can prevent a source of infection going from somebody who is infected to the people around them.
I was on the phone this morning to a colleague in Hong Kong who's a professor there who's done the evidence review for the World Health Organization on face masks, and we're of the same mind that there is no evidence that general wearing of face masks by the public who are well affects the spread of the disease in our society. In terms of the hard evidence and what the UK government recommends, we do not recommend face masks for general wearing by the public.
It clearly is a very serious epidemic. but equally the fact that actually the great majority of people will not die from this. And I'll just repeat something I said right at the beginning, because I think it's worth reinforcing. Most people, well, a significant proportion of people will not get this virus at all at any point in the epidemic, which is going to go on for a long period of time. Of those who do, some of them will get the virus without even knowing it. They will have the virus with no symptoms at all, asymptomatic carriage, and we know that happens. Of those who get symptoms, the great majority, probably 80%, will have a mild or moderate disease. Might be bad enough for them to have to go to bed for a few days, not bad enough for them to have to go to the doctor. An unfortunate minority will have to go as far as hospital, but the majority of those will just need oxygen and will then leave hospital. And then a minority of those will end up having to go to severe and critical care, and some of those, sadly, will die. But that's a minority. It's 1% or possibly even less than 1% overall. And even in the highest risk group, this is significantly less than 20%, i.e. the great majority of people, even the very highest groups, if they catch this virus, will not die. And I've really wanted to make that point really clearly.
So without further ado, let's cut to the chase and take a look at an ordinary surgical mask, and I'm using a vape. As you can see, that vape, which has aerosols the same size as COVID-19 or larger, goes through and around a surgical mask. Now, if we take a cup mask and have a good look at it, here we go. Notice it goes right through the mask easily and goes in every direction. The aerosol is not affected by the mask in any material. Now we look at a surgical mask with a foam strip to protect above and keep my glasses from fogging. Lo and behold, the aerosols go all around it. Has no effect on me spreading aerosols to you. Now a cloth mask I borrowed from my wife. Once again, here we go. Boom, straight through and around. It has no effect on the spread of aerosols. They go everywhere. And then I went and bought a guard mask with a high efficiency filter material. That one, here we go. Watch for it. Through and around. It had no effect on the vape aerosol, which, remember, is the same size or larger. Now, I don't have an N95 mask. I have these shop respirators where they can put all kinds of things in them, but they're like an N95 because when you breathe out, everything goes out through a valve. Guess what? It might protect me from you. It sure isn't going to protect you from me. Let's look at that again. Boom. Any mask with a button on it has a valve that lets everything go from you to your neighbor. It has no effect on anything. I think you can get the picture now. There is absolutely nothing that any of these masks do to protect you from me. And the fact is that unless I have a mask which is fully sealed and where I breathe through the filter material both directions, and I have a really high quality filter, nothing is going to protect in either direction. Because just the same way that the vape went out, around, and through, it will come in, around, and through. Aerosols will not be stopped by mask.
And I'm going to test oxygen level under a mask using an OSHA-approved air quality monitor that tests for oxygen levels, hazardous gas levels, LEL, CO, NH3, H2S, stuff like that. This monitor is bump tested every day. It's calibrated every 30 days. OSHA requires 19.5% oxygen to work in a space. Look it up. Normal oxygen levels is anywhere from 20 to 21, right in that area. So I'm gonna do a little test here. I'm gonna put the sampling tube at the corner of my mouth, and I'm not exerted, I'm just standing here. So we're gonna put it right here. That's going straight to the air quality monitor. And we'll see what the oxygen level is. So I've got 20.5, okay, 20.6. That is the oxygen level without the mask. Now I'm going to set the camera down, put a mask on. Do the same test, hose in the same spot. You can hear the alarm going off. That means that there is a hazardous atmosphere. And we'll see what the levels are. 17.4. 17.5, it's starting to go back up. Okay. It's going to clear at 19.5. And that's what is required to work in a space. So, if you're wondering about headaches and stuff like that, there's why. Because you're not getting enough oxygen. If you're exerted, working, running, whatever the case may be, it's only going to get worse from there. So, you know, it is what it is. You're not going to see this on the news because they don't want you to know this on the news. So take it for what it's worth.
So there you are. Those are the quotes. This is the evidence. Masks do not work, and there are plenty of scientific papers which were written before the end of April or the end of March 2020 which showed this. In fact, there is as much evidence or even more evidence that prolonged wearing of masks can damage your health more than prevent the risk of infection to yourself or others. Only the recent studies that the WHO have posted and some other websites seem to suggest they have some benefit in protecting you against infection or protecting from infection. As you saw, practical demonstrations strongly imply and suggest that the virus particles would not be stopped, and there is an argument which says that inhaled oxygen levels would drop and the mask could cause a higher CO2 level near your mouth or face. And why would you need to do this? Here we have another person who's not a health professional actually trying to say that you should wear a mask. Has she done a risk assessment? Does she know that some people can't wear masks?
Wear a face covering in a shop.
But if someone's not wearing their mask and they refuse to, do I ring the police?
Well, I would say if you've tried everything and you're really concerned, you can't get the person out of the store, and you know they're getting aggressive or whatever. Yes, of course you should ring the police.
Only if they get aggressive.
Well, I think people will.
How helpful is this law?
My hope is that the vast majority of people will comply.
Indeed.
And that people who are not complying will be shamed into complying or shamed to leave the store by the storekeepers or by other
But unless there's aggression,
members
don't
of the
call the police.
public. If somebody is concerned about what's going on in their store, yes, of course they should call the police, and we will try to assist.
So let's not forget that Cressida Dick is a common purpose graduate, and one of their taglines is leading beyond authority. Is she leading beyond authority in a field that she is not qualified in, such as health advice? She was in charge of the Met police operation in which innocent Jean-Charles de Menezes was shot in the weeks after the alleged 7/7 bombing, so you can go and look that up if you want. And I use the word alleged there deliberately. So really I think that medical malpractice has been done with the enforced mask wearing for going to see doctors and things and certain other services. Treatments, however, in other medical malpractice have not been given to the sick, and ventilators have been wrongly used or not used. And we've seen stories emerge across the world. I've certainly heard of a few in the UK. Again, you can do your own research. I've got a couple linked in the report that I've done. There have been abuses of the Do Not Resuscitate permission form. This has apparently led to the deaths of certain elderly people who perhaps should have been resuscitated and they haven't. Visitors have been barred from hospitals and care homes because of this so-called risk. Some people have died alone. Regular treatments have been delayed or stopped, sometimes due to patients' fear of going to hospitals, others because of cancellations. And this drug here, hydroxychloroquine has not been used when it should be used. So don't forget this one, everybody. Hydroxychloroquine. This should have been used in many more cases than it has. Multiple studies show that hydroxychloroquine works. You can see, for example, the paper by Dr. Simone Gold, and you can look at that. Mandating mask wearing and the examples above are all examples of medical malpractice, and that should be punishable by law. And in the UK, as far as I'm concerned, the Health and Social Care Act 2012 has been breached because these procedures have been introduced in so many areas without an impact assessment. I go through that in my report, the fraud report. There was a headline not too long ago which came out, I think this was in September sometime. The story is, the link is at the bottom there. And we had the National Audit Office investigated the use or the purchase of ventilators, and 20,900 ventilators were purchased at a cost of £569 million, and most remain unused. So how do you work that one out when this is a pandemic which clearly needed this equipment to help these patients who couldn't breathe? And in fact, if you look into this, it appears that ventilation patients in many cases was the wrong treatment, and it actually damaged their lungs unnecessarily and may have caused some of them to die because they changed the treatment protocol. Normally they would have maybe given them oxygen or some other medication, but no, they put them on a ventilator, which is invasive and can cause tissue damage and so forth. And again, you can investigate for specific cases of that if you wish, but the main point is to note the over purchase of this equipment which has been wasted. And next we have, we've already observed this really up to now, human rights have been discarded because COVID measures ignore basic human rights. So I'm just mentioning a couple of those. Now I, look at this and say, well, what's happening now is that you're assumed infectious until proven otherwise. So they're testing healthy people. Even though the test doesn't determine if you're really infected or not, it just detects if you have a trace of this virus. Perhaps it detects this, perhaps it detects something else. But you are still now assumed when you go to somewhere like a GP surgery to be infectious until proven otherwise. So if this principle is not upheld, then basic human freedom is compromised, and this, in spirit, is a contravention of Article 11 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, everyone charged with a penal offence has the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty, according to law, in a public trial at which he has had all the guarantees necessary for his defence. Now, if you take the view that self-isolation is a form of imprisonment, then people are being wrongly imprisoned with no evidence because they are assumed to be infectious until proven otherwise. So they've encouraged people to actually discard their own human rights of freedom of movement because of the way they've set this scare situation up. And track and trace measures, once again, these are unworkable, and in the absence of a reliable gold standard measure of the presence of an infectious virus which actually poses a risk, serious risk to other people, the use of such measures, track and trace that is, whatever standard they are based on, contravenes Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honour or reputation. Everyone has the right to protection of the law against such interference or attacks, and the protection of the law has been removed. So please think about these issues very carefully, particularly anybody that's involved in implementing these recommendations or rules or guidelines or laws or whatever you want to call them. They are wrong. If measures are taken with forced vaccinations or mask wearing, that applies to mask wearing as I see it, this is in breach of the principle of informed consent, which is enshrined in the Nuremberg Code. So, what you've got to understand really is that now the government is in a narcissistic, abusive relationship with the general public. and this is happening across the world. So what you do is, for example, you set up these lockdowns, you put all these threats in front of people, you threaten to essentially psychologically beat them up, and then you sort of say, oh, it's okay now, everything's back to normal, and you give them a few months where everything's okay, and then as we stand here in the UK, for example, and this has happened in other countries, in Wales, in Scotland, in Australia, you put them back into this so-called lockdown status because of this so-called risk. You abuse them again, which is exactly what happens in domestic relationships, where one partner can abuse another and then back off for a few weeks and then do it again. And this is what is going on, I think, with, for example, this next clip that I've got.
It still appears to be rare that an asymptomatic individual actually transmits onward. What we really want to be focused on is following the symptomatic cases. If we followed all of the symptomatic cases, because we know that this is a respiratory pathogen, it passes from an individual through infectious droplets. If we actually followed all of the symptomatic cases, isolated those cases, followed the contacts and quarantined those contacts, we would drastically reduce. I would love to be able to give a proportion of how much transmission we would actually stop.
The World Health Organization yesterday casting some doubt and causing some confusion about the spread of the coronavirus through asymptomatic infections. You heard a top WHO official calling asymptomatic transmission, quote, very rare, emphasizing it is not driving the spread of the virus. The new conclusion was drawn from new contact tracing data from several countries.
Professor Gupta, I want to say it again. We in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as a primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted. But by and large, we'd rather not do it. Just look at what's happened to the tourism industry, for example, in the Caribbean or in the Pacific, because people aren't taking their holidays. Look what's happened to smallholder farmers all over the world because their markets have got dented. Look what's happening to poverty levels. It seems that we may well have a doubling of world poverty by next year. We may well have at least a doubling of child malnutrition because children are not getting meals at school and their parents in poor families are not able to afford it. This is a terrible, ghastly global catastrophe, actually. And so we really do appeal to all world leaders. Stop using lockdown as your primary control method. Develop better systems for doing it. Work together and learn from each other. But remember, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never, ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer.
And so we then have, following that, in a similar vein, we heard the WHO guy there say that we shouldn't use lockdowns. Well, that's essentially what they were saying that you should do. That's what that 2005 document was. They didn't call it a lockdown then, but it was something very similar. So what's it to be? And here you have another example which was sent to me. This is from a WHO document about pandemic management and so forth and what strategies you should use. And you will see here that in a pandemic, not recommended under any circumstances is, there you have it, contact tracing. And not recommended in an epidemic, contact tracing. So, and there should be no border closure. Well, that's exactly what's happened. So what's going on? This is the WHO's recommendations that governments are actually going against. So what is going on? It's an abusive relationship between governments and the people. They're not trying to protect your health. They're abusing you. So now we move on to the final part of this presentation, which is to do with the green agenda. And you've got to look at this on the World Economic Forum. Well, I've got to look there, of course. This is one of the main areas where this is being promoted on the World Economic Forum. The leader of the World Economic Forum is a chap called Klaus Schwab, and I'm not going to go into him here. You can look him up and do a bit of research. I'm not sure he's a particularly likeable character. I've never met him personally, but the little I've heard of him and about him doesn't really give me a warm glow, let me say that. So this, they've got this on their website, they've got this strategic intelligence app, you might call it. And it's quite a piece of work. You, again, look up the COVID-19 platform. So a small amount of research reveals that rich business leaders seem to want to reshape or revamp or reorganize our world according to their own ideas, without consultation or permission. They are trying to use a carrot of biosecurity to get us to go along with their plans. They have clearly been planning this new thing they want, the Great Reset, for some time, as a visit to the World Economic Forum website and their COVID-19 Strategic Intelligence Interactive Map or app, or whatever you want to call it, seems to reveal. And the leader of the WEF is Klaus Schwab. And look at this image that somebody's put together. Well, why are these two people together? I'll show you on the next slide. It is interesting to note that this speech from the 16th of October 2017 was about the fourth industrial revolution, and Matt Hancock spoke there. And then at the end of the speech, he actually says, "It's a pleasure to introduce the man who made the fourth industrial revolution a household name, Professor Klaus Schwab." But what's he talking about prior to this? Well, this is something I forgot to bring up when I gave this talk last night, but he's talking about 5G and the implementation of 5G. Well, what sort of technology they're going to need to keep track of all these, movement of all these goods, all these people, all these health passports. Maybe they need better tracking technology and better data transfer technology when all this, this data is flying around the grid. And I haven't even got into this discussion of how certain 5G technology can use like phased arrays, which allows the beams to be directed at people. And so, think about some of the possible implications of that. Now, of course, I don't want to be the scaremonger on this, but what I'm saying is that this 5G technology does have certain potentials which the 3G and the 4G technology didn't have. It works in different ways. It's got a lot of different techniques that they can use to keep this data transfer rate very high. But is it just for using faster data rates? Some people will tell you it's based on a weapons system. And I've heard that certainly from one expert that would know about these things. He says it's like a weapons technology, elements of the technology. So again, do some more research and look at how this all hangs together, and it ain't pretty. So I've got a couple more video clips here, or three. And first is the WHO leader Tedros, and then we've got Boris and Biden. And they're all talking about building back better.
Throughout history, outbreaks and pandemics have changed economies and societies. This one will be no different. In particular, the pandemic has given new impetus to the need to accelerate efforts to respond to climate change. The pandemic has given us a glimpse of our world as it could be: cleaner skies and rivers. Building back better means building back greener. In May, WHO published our manifesto for a healthy and green recovery.
We owe it to future generations to build back better.
We have a great opportunity to build back and build back better.
To do things differently, to build back better, and to build back bolder.
And folks, it's not sufficient to build back. We have to build back better. That's what my plan is, to build back better. It's bold.
So there you are. And again, let's look at the World Economic Forum a bit further. So here we see several headlines, and I'm sure you could find plenty more if you looked. France in huge coronavirus recovery plan focusing on green energy. And there they all are. Look at them in their masks, waving. Isn't it fantastic? Who are these people? Who are these people? Here's another one, World Economic Forum, how renewable energy can drive a post-COVID recovery. Nice little windmill there. There you go. And then another one. Global leaders must act fast to ensure a green recovery. And more wind farm images. We have a 6-month window to get global green recovery underway, it says. COVID-19 is a game changer for renewable energy. Here's why. So they seem to be pushing this pretty hard. It's now changed from a virus to a green energy thing. So what's that all about? Well, if you're wondering about the green agenda, you might want to find out a little bit more than you might know about 9/11. For example, did you know that there was a hurricane in this position? You see there, the yellow square here. This is the plume of material which was coming from the site of the World Trade Center. It was visible from space, and not ever so far away actually. The outer bands were going on to Cape Cod just, was Hurricane Erin, with a pentacle in the center. And did you know that Hurricane Erin was given a name on the 1st of September, and then it travelled up and hit Bermuda on the 7th of September, and then it went for 4 days in a straight line towards New York City, and then it slowed down while the events of 9/11 were unfolding, and then it made a right-hand turn, went off out toward Newfoundland on the 12th of September. Now, I'm not going to say any more about that. I'll leave you to investigate that for yourselves. But this is just one reason where you can see there is much, much more to the climate change and green agenda than you have been told about. And if you want to find out more about that, you can read my book about that, which is called Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed, Hidden Evidence, Disguised Plans. So there is a sort of mark of how big the hurricane got as it moved in that path. So moving on then, we seem to have a certain person here that you've probably heard of, and he seems to be hobnobbing with some world leaders, doesn't he? Oh, and look where Bono was, look where Blair was. Obviously that's a few years old now, probably 10, 15 years old. And look at who's to the left of Mr. Gates here. Interesting collection, isn't it? I'm sure you recognise these two. I mentioned that picture in my first report. And then, of course, we've got Mr. Gates and Jimmy Krankie, Nicola Sturgeon. And then, just to draw your attention to this, December the 19th, so this is not long after the Event 201 tabletop exercise, Mr. Gates tweets, "What's next for our foundation? Well, I'm particularly excited about what the next year could mean for one of the best buys in global health." The best buys, he says, not the safest, not the most, saving the most lives or promoting the best health. The best buys, he says. Vaccines. I'll leave that one with you. Oh, and look who else he met. There you go, you can read about that in the New York Times, can't you? And look at this. This law has been, I don't know whether it's been passed into law, but it was going through Parliament recently. I haven't got the date here. You can look at this BBC article. And it's about authorising crime. New rules for MI5 and police to authorise crimes. They're authorising themselves to commit crimes. So here's the story. Let me just get the date on this while I've clicked on it. 23rd of September. There you are. So this is all cracking off at the same time as the coronavirus bill revisions and renewals. Isn't that interesting? Which agencies will be able to authorise secret crimes? Well, there's a whole list there, isn't there? Competition and Markets Authority, Environment Agency, Financial Conduct Authority, Food Standards Agency, and Medicines and Healthcare Regulation Authority. They can all authorise crime. Why would they want to do that, I wonder? So, what are the motives for this scam then? I hope you understand by now that it's a scam. Maybe you don't, in which case, why are you still listening? You've probably gone off to do other, more productive things for your own purposes. But this question is asked at first when you start to explain to them that what they are being told is not true. They will ask, why would people lie? And they do this before studying the available evidence that I've mentioned here. But the motives, as I've started to show towards the end of this presentation, appear to tie in with Agenda 21, 2030 and thinking, and they're promoted by the UN and many non-governmental organisations. The measures to mitigate alleged climate change have many similarities to those being implemented to prevent pandemic waves. And Bill Gates has openly stated that their intention is to get the whole world vaccinated. Companies he uses, promotes, etc. He says that he can get a 20-to-1 return on the sale of vaccinations. He said that Davos, I think in 2019, in January. Governments should indemnify vaccine makers, he said, and movements of those not vaccinated should be restricted. He said all of that in his BBC interview on the 12th of April 2020. The overarching goal seems to be to create a society where most or all movements of people and goods are tracked and controlled. So that's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals which are promoted by the UN. So I want to just play one more clip now, which I should have loaded up here.
Let's talk about a solution, because, God, we can't talk about the problems forever. The Millennium Development Goals, the guiding principle of the United Nations that were set in the year 2000, are expiring, and they are going to be replaced by the Sustainable Development Goals. Bill Gates described the Millennium Development Goals as a phenomenal thing just last week at the Clinton Global Initiative, where I stood up and made an announcement that we are trying to get the ocean to become part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, whatever you think about the United Nations, a Sustainable Development Goal would have an absolutely electrifying effect for all of us in this room. The Millennium Development Goals were highly effective in global poverty, HIV and malaria, and I believe that an ocean sustainable development goal would have a similar and brilliant effect, fostering unprecedented global cooperation between the public and private sector. It would unleash billions of dollars towards some of the problems that we have, and money is definitely part of the root of the problem that we are facing within the ocean. And not only that, but it would be able to support some of the most brilliant initiatives, many of you who are here have these great ideas but need funding, you need firepower, and you need government structure. The Sustainable Development Goals are being voted on in September 2014, and currently they are not part of the United Nations agenda. So I made a commitment at the Clinton Global Initiative in partnership with Ambassador Beck, who is the first appointed United Nations ambassador to the oceans and the sea, Amir Dossal from the Global Forum Partnership, and an academic, to say that we are going to work towards getting a sustainable ocean development goal.
So how interesting is that? A sustainable development goal for the ocean. Does that mean that's one of the last areas they can't easily control? They can control air travel quite easily now. Land travel they're going to be controlling with 5G. 5G probably doesn't work as well at sea, although they've got these satellites up now. So they want to gain control of the oceans more because that's one of the areas that they are less able to control, perhaps. Who knows? And I hope I didn't need to mention who that was who was saying those words and what her background and history appears to be. So October the 30th, this LifeSite News website, which is essentially pro-Trump, that published this article about Time magazine. It announces the Great Reset to usher in the world of socialism. That's the heading on this article, and you can see the cover there. It says the Great Reset Time underneath. So why isn't the Great Reset down here? Maybe they're making it obvious, and this globe being taken apart. Time magazine has devoted an entire issue to promoting an initiative called the Great Reset, referred to by one commentator as the Green New Deal on steroids, which will seek to advance the socialist ideals, including the destruction of capitalism and individual rights. So that kind of says it all, really, doesn't it? Make of it what you will. Rights. Technocrats, Great Barrington Declaration, and Bermuda Grass. Why settle for reform when a radical solution is needed? We are being offered a reform in the midst of a revolution that threatens to subject all life on Earth to blockchain techno-fascism. This declaration is not the right tool. We must commit ourselves to exposing all the tentacles that the truth of what is happening. It is only in that truth that we will tap into the strength of spirit needed to go up against this global, militarized financial apparatus and its public health minions. The clock is ticking. No half measures. The threat we face is much bigger than lockdown. What we really need to be fighting is the biosecurity state and medical tyranny. And I can't agree with that more. You've got to get your head around this big agenda if you really want to make a difference to it. And realise, for example, that one of the ways out is a release of health freedom. Having health freedom, the cures for cancer, widespread use of cannabis oil being just one example to treat cancers. Other people that have spoken out are on this slide. I won't read them all out. Sue Cook, very notable, because she used to front the BBC Crime Watch programme. She did that for several years. You can look that up. She did an interview where she says she stopped listening to BBC Radio 4 now. I certainly stopped listening to any BBC output, and that includes music programmes. I have not listened to any BBC output at all since this all started kicking off in March. Rachel Elner, Dragon's Den, Peter Ebdon, who I've been in communication with a few times. He was a former World Snook Champion from 2002. And all those other people, Richard Madeley's spoken out a bit, although these are mainly doing limited hangouts, saying there's something wrong, but they don't say what the wrong particularly is. Jim Core, Ian Brown, Liam Gallagher, Van Morrison. He's released 3 protest songs, which are quite interesting, quite well done. Few MPs and politicians have spoken out. Steve Baker, who has apparently gone back on his word now. Desmond Swain, David Curtin, Martin Daubney, who I'm not familiar with, and a few other people. But there seem to be few and far between, and their voices, at least, have not reached my ears very much, apart from Desmond, the top 2 there. Legal action has been started. Dr. Rainer Fulmick, in the US and Germany, he's set up a class action lawsuit. He was the guy that actually went after Volkswagen for their fuel emissions lies, and apparently they were prosecuted for that or fined for that. Michael Obenisha has got a common law initiative going. I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. And Simon Dolan, of course, has had this judicial review in progress for several months now, but not much seems to have come out of that. A few bits and bobs have come out, like getting certain documents released and stuff. But the last announcement he made, which was, I think, yesterday, seemed fairly sort of diluted, really. And there's people, Brexit is also asking for a judicial review, but on a different basis to Simon Dolan's case, based on the evidence that they don't really have a virus, that they can actually, prove exists. So to finish off then, just a few websites. I'll try and put all these in the description so that you can access those there if you want them all together. I do recommend that you watch the Plandemic videos from plandemicseries.com. Have a look at those. They're very good, succinct presentations of the evidence, particularly about Bill Gates, who I've only just not mentioned much here, but there's a pretty comprehensive 10 or 15 minutes on Mr. Gates in the Plandemic 2 film, which should make you consider him in a new light if you just thought he was some computer software nerd and opportunist businessman. So further points to consider, just to finish off: a visit to your local cemetery or cemeteries will confirm that this is not a pandemic. And according to the commonly agreed definition, where thousands and thousands of people have died, we've had very few excess deaths, which means the cemeteries haven't really filled up. The virus has not been proven to exist, and virus actually means poison. People die from respiratory illnesses all the time, and it's worse in the winter months. It's been like that for decades, so expect it to happen again as we get into the winter months now, as we are at the beginning of November 2020. The quarantine of healthy people does not stop the spread of a virus. Only those proven to have a virus and be exhibiting serious symptoms should be quarantined and also tested if there is a test. But again, this whole idea of infectious disease can be called rightfully into question. The general wearing of masks by healthy people does not prevent the spread of a virus, if a virus can even spread in that way, as some would dispute. Hydroxychloroquine, sometimes with zinc, has been successfully used to treat people who have shown serious symptoms of respiratory illness, including the alleged COVID-19. Only a few people cannot take this drug, and again, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg has written about that, so you can check that out. I've got a link to that article on my website, CV Pandemic Investigation. So an untested vaccine is likely to cause far more damage and will not give any real protection against a SARS-CoV-2 type virus. Anyway, this has already been stated in the literature. It probably won't give you protection. They've actually said that already, believe it or not. How can a vaccine be developed for something that has never been isolated properly? It's just guesswork. So what they're doing, why it won't work, is because it's just guesswork. It's like when they developed a 2007 vaccine for a 2009 virus. Think about it. So what are you going to do next? Well, you can share this information. You can try to build networks of non-compliance to any proposed measures or any measures that are enforced or try to be enforced. They're all unlawful anyway, all of the measures, without exception, because they have no evidence, no legal or scientific basis to operate on when you actually pull it apart. Government leaders and many an authority should be challenged with prosecution under common law. Many of them should literally be put in prison. Probably don't have enough prisons, actually. The reports that I've done and similar efforts could be used as a basis for further exploring how to prosecute these people and bring them to justice, because they have committed crimes and they continue to do so by the definition that we used to use only a year or so ago. So there you are. I hope you found that useful and that you were able to share this with friends and family, maybe some people that haven't really studied any of this. I welcome feedback and corrections to any of this. I want to make this information correct and truthful as best I can. So if there are any errors, please do alert me to them, and I will try somehow to correct those errors. You can find me on Facebook if you want to communicate with me, or via the website with the contact form and stuff. And my other website, which goes into a lot of other areas, is checktheevidence.com. So I thank you very much for spending the time listening, and I wish you well.
Bill Gates warned of a new virus that would cripple the world. This year, his predictions came true.
Are you blind? Can't you see what you're doing to me? Understand? Take my hand and let's walk barefoot by the sea. Hold your head up high, then refuse to comply. Don't you care? Come on, man. Are you kidding me? Wake up! Wake up!